Greetings there, friend, and welcome to the fire. Got another one of those That Guy DM stories once again. You know the type, DM versus player mentality, but that's just my DM style excuses, over the top edgelord, creeping on a female player, crossing player boundaries, and etc. Just checking off all those boxes. Coworker turns out to be a control freak GM and single-handedly ruins our friendship, and nearly one other. r/RPG horror stories posted by Fajailberg. I had a situation finally end a while back as a player in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign run by a coworker that ultimately ruined our friendship as well as the campaign itself. So, a bit of context. I was concurrently running a campaign with a coworker I befriended, who I will refer to as Gnome, because he exclusively plays as gnomes, as well as being a player in a second campaign run by Gnome. We would alternate each week DMing our respective campaigns. Gnome's campaign had its fair share of frustrating issues, such as punishing us for doing anything outside the track he had adamantly railroaded us onto. Other were just really bizarre and difficult encounters that often resulted in one or two party members dying, to which our new characters would have to start a few levels behind everyone else as punishment for dying, and strangely violent and gory at random times. And the campaign was difficult, but not horrible, and I try to be understanding in our different approaches. Eventually, I did approach him and discuss some of these issues, and he told me it was his style, and that he had a story to tell, and having the stakes high in every encounter meant we had to focus and feel the stress of the situation. I think that is just lazy ass DMing more than anything else, but maybe he had some master plan, and I figure I would just be patient. Well, things took a turn for the worse when a friend of mine wanted to join. We will call her Dova, cause she played a Dragonborn. See, up until this point, our Dungeons & Dragons sessions consisted of just 4 guys. My friend Dova was interested in one of the other party members, not Gnome. I was buzzed with, and she figures this was a good chance to get to know him, as well as a great opportunity to try Dungeons & Dragons. I would have suggested my campaign, but the guy she expressed interest couldn't make the time for 2 campaigns. I figure maybe having a new person may liven things in Gnome's campaign, and maybe he would go a bit easier on us. I wouldn't be writing this if that was the case. From the first day, with the new player, the campaign's tone swerved and became over the top edgy and creepy. Gnome said he wanted the campaign to be more dark and intense, but by dark and intense, he meant a middle schooler who is misunderstood because he recently discovered anime and thinks he's seen the real world because he watches effing Riverdale by night and is secretly afraid of his non-Christian neighbors by day's definition of dark and intense. He would play a recorded track of screams in the background, constantly. He began showing images from whatever horror movie or anime he just watched on his TV. I couldn't tell if I wanted to laugh or sink into my hoodie from the overt levels of cringe. To make matters worse, Gnome exclusively focused on Dova, to the point that he would lock the other player characters in a room so he could have an NPC to try to flirt with her character. It was already late, getting out of hand, so I told him I needed to leave early because I had to prep some reports for work, thus ending the session. On the way out, I asked him to tone it down, but again, he insisted he was the DM and he wanted to tell his story. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, since maybe he had already planned all of this before knowing about the new player joining us. I figured I would do another session to see how it goes. We got together again 2 weeks later, and it just got worse. Starting off, Gnome places a dungeon in front of us while we insist that we want to head to town to finish another quest first. His DM player character keeps insisting we enter, although we keep trying to return to town. Eventually, Gnome's character gives up. On the path, we stumble into a trap and ambush. 3 of us fail the roll high enough and are knocked out. One of the other players rolled a natural 20, so he gets to remain conscious even though he still fell into the trap and is tied up by the ambushers alongside everyone else. Coincidentally enough, we were all dragged to the very dungeon from earlier. What are the chances? About halfway in, things started to get to be a little too much as Gnome began describing lower regions of the dungeon. The narrative is again switched to overly graphic and gratuitous. Gnome continued to ignore the entire party except for Dova. The enemies continually made creepy remarks toward her character, to which, when I called him out, he claimed, they are bad guys, so they say whatever they feel like. To lighten the mood and to distract from the obnoxious shit, the 4 of us player characters just made dumb jokes throughout. Even though the DM was being ridiculous, we all were still able to have some fun making each other laugh. That is up until we get to the final boss. The final boss must have been Gnome's magnum opus, because he spent the whole time hyping it up. And you know what the big baddie was? A vampire. The Lord of Evil that stole our souls and was the most dangerous and evil thing ever according to Gnome. Because I was pretty much done at this point, I laughed when he announced he was a vampire. Gnome did not appreciate this and went on a brief rant about me not taking this seriously and how laughing at this moment is out of character for my barbarian named Cludge the Bread-Fisted. I responded with a good old, okay buddy, and it really must have irked him because his little vampire champ started becoming really aggressive. His vampire's comments towards me were abnormally violent and graphic even for him. Then he started making threats towards Dova, who once again is still brand new to D&D. I honestly do not feel comfortable repeating most of what he said, the least of which involved killing her character and drinking her menstrual blood, among other things, and all of which were overly sexual and ultimately crossing the line. My friend Dova was obviously upset, and I finally just said I was done. I didn't say anything else as Dova and I and the other players packed up and left. I spent the entire ride home apologizing profusely to my friend. Even now, when I think about it, I still feel bad. My coworker was being a shit, but I should have ended things sooner. I recognize how monstrous he was being and that words just wouldn't get through to him, and I should have just gotten my friend and I out of there before it went too far. Sometimes words aren't enough, and the best you can do is to leave a toxic environment. Luckily, this fiasco didn't destroy my friendship with Dova. We occasionally joke about it, although there is still that lingering discomfort about the whole thing. I still have to work with Gnome every other day, and I mostly just avoid him. There's an episode of Malcolm in the Middle where Hal has a coworker he can't help but despise with some sort of primal rage, and now I understand that. Whenever he speaks up during meetings or reports, even when he's doing nothing, I am just filled with this primal rage. I've already chewed him out once over this whole nightmare, but I can't seem to let this go. A lot of you are probably wondering why I bothered to even play D&D with him in the first place. The thing is, when I first met him, he was pretty fun and energetic, and he wanted to play D&D. He also had an entire house to himself. My apartment was pretty small, and I lived downtown, where parking anywhere within a mile radius of the place was a nightmare. So we always met at his house, and I really enjoyed running my campaign and figured I suffered through his as not to give up mine. Here's the thing, D&D for me is just a way to have a fun time with friends. I don't want to play D&D to experience a dark or depressing world. I have a master's in international relations and I work at a effing UPS store. I don't need or want that. TLDR, Coworker wants to play Dungeons and Dragons. One of my friends wants to join the campaign. Coworker turns out to be a creepy edgelord control freak insistent on shoving his creepy sexual fantasy on my friend. I get pissed, leave with friend. Spend my days seething in pure, unadulterated hatred towards my perverted, horror freak coworker. Yikes. Oh man, I honestly don't get why DMs like Gnome have that mentality of DM versus players and think that games like D&D can be quote-unquote won. It's a game of storytelling where DMs with their players and vice versa work together to create a story for the enjoyment of everyone at the table. And now this is just my personal opinion, but level penalties just suck, especially when you're knocked down back to level 1 every time you die. It just becomes a slog fest at times. No one is having any fun at that point. Honestly, I pity people like Gnome. Until they can get past their toxic behavior and grow as a person, they will never be able to foster a healthy relationship with the people around them. How Gnome treated Dova was all sorts of wrong, especially when you consider that Gnome had no prior friendship or any type of relationship with her beforehand. Good on OP for calling Gnome out. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. And would you kindly follow the socials posted in the description below. As always, be good, be great, be awesome.